Everybody. I welcome you all in this series of webinar hosted by Shaukat Khanum Cancer Hospital on the topics of cancer care in COVID-19. Today, we will specifically be targeting about issues and challenges faced in radiation oncology department during this pandemic. I am Dr. Tabinda Sadaf, clinical oncologist and head of department of radiation. This series of webinar hosted by Shaukat Khanum Cancer Hospital on topics of cancer care in COVID-19. So I'm Dr. Tabinda Sadaf, clinical and radiation oncologist. Issues and challenges faced in radiation oncology department during this pandemic. I am Dr. Tabinda Sadaf, clinical and radiation oncologist and head of department at Shaukat Khanum Cancer Hospital. And I have with me a panel of expert members. I would like to introduce my expert panel with you. I have Dr. Arif Jamshed with me. Dr. Arif, you can wave to the audience.
I need to wave to everybody.
Dr. Arif Jamshed is a senior clinical oncologist at Shaukat Khanum Hospital with vast administrative experience, and he is a leading expert in the country in head and neck cancers. Dr. Sumaira Bhatt.
Hello.
Dr. Sumaira Bhatt is a clinical oncologist, lead for breast cancer radiotherapy, and she has special interest in genitourinary and brain tumors. And we have with us Dr. On Raza. He's an infectious disease expert and frontline force in this entire pandemic. I would like to welcome you all and thank you for taking time and joining us. We all know that the rapid global impact of COVID-19 is unprecedented and unexpected, where a pandemic has brought the world to a screeching halt. But we all agree and we all know that the cancer never stops, and so are the cancer treatments. So I would like to start with Dr. Arif first, that if you could summarize with me the challenges that we have faced in radiation oncology department during this pandemic.
Thanks, Tavinda. I think first of all, for all of us, this format of presenting is the first time. So if we are going to make any mistakes over here or we look stupid, then you will please have to bear with us, because we are also trying to learn as we are trying to learn with the pandemic epidemic. Radiation department itself is unique. The treatments which we do are treatments which are prescribed over a period of time. And these treatments have to be completed once they have started. So when a pandemic situation arises, there are two immediate problems which the department faces. One is what to do with the patients who are on treatment. And the second one is what to do with the patients who are waiting for the treatment. But before I talk about these two important things, I would ask On to tell us something about how we are going to protect our patients against the disease. Because coming to the department is the second step. The first step is to screen these patients and only allow patients who are safe to come into the hospital. And then we can talk about the other aspect. So On, what do we do over here? What did we do in Shaukat Khanum so as to save or at least protect our patients?
Thank you, Dr. Arif. First of all, when this outbreak started in China, we started preparing for this, because at that time we didn't know exactly that whether it will come to Pakistan or not, but we started our preparation. We started with the education session for our staff in the hospital to making them aware of this current situation, that we probably will have to face this at some point. And when this the first case reported by the end of February, I think we were most of our staff, we were aware of this pandemic and this virus, and they knew what is this and how we are going to tackle with this. So first thing which we did, after staff education, we started screening counters at various entry points in our hospital, and where the patient care officers were there, and they were actually asking screening questions from patients, and this according to our case definition, which had actually changed after every few days, because initially it included fever and travel history to China, but later on Italy was added, and then Iran, and then when we had cases in Pakistan, then we included other cities like Karachi, etc.
Sorry to cut you on. So as it is for any hospital, the first thing which they need to do is to actually prepare beforehand.
Yes.
Once they knew that the pandemic was on its way, the hospital itself should gear up in a sense where the staff needs to be trained. So the training of the staff would be the first point because only trained people will be able to deliver the care.
Yeah.
And for that, you did the training sessions and at the same time, you conducted what you call classes and also from the equipment point of view, how to use the equipment and what to do and how to approach a patient who would be with COVID. And the second thing was where the staff, the flow of the patients, that how that was going to happen. Can you tell us something about the COVID camp and what was the thinking behind setting up that camp and how it would also be benefit for the hospital?
Yeah, so as Dr. Arif mentioned about the Camp COVID, so we established a camp outside the hospital main building so that if there are the suspected patients, they should not enter the main hospital building and should not infect our healthcare workers and other cancer patients because our cancer patients were the priority at that time. So after screening at the counters, anybody who has symptoms, he was referred to Camp COVID. And so even before referring to Camp COVID, they were offered a surgical mask. Anybody who had respiratory symptoms, so they were offered a surgical mask by the patient care officer, and then they were referred to Camp COVID. Where still that Camp COVID is still there, and we are asking the questions, taking a more detailed history, and after assessing the patient whether the patient requires testing for COVID. And if the patient requires testing, then we'll ask the patient to not enter the main building because he's probably suspected patient.
Sorry, so would it be right if I say that the COVID camp actually was serving two purposes? One was that it was screening the patients who were actually coming into the hospital so as to minimize exposure of the staff as well as other patients who may possibly have COVID. And secondly, also it was serving the community as well, where patients could come in who had symptoms and can be screened for COVID.
Yes, that's right. So it had actually two purposes. Mainly it was for our own patients, but since we are a hospital and this pandemic was going to hit Pakistan soon, so we decided that for community also not only for our own patients but for community as well. If somebody comes in for screening, they can have screening there, and if they fulfill our case definition and criteria for testing, then we'll test them, and then we'll start.
Throughout this period, have been getting a daily, what you call, email and update on the guidelines as such, because this is a situation where things keep on changing, and it is extremely important for the staff to remain updated with what the current recommendations are. And for that, putting a mail through to all the staff and making them aware of what the requirements are and what needs to be done and what we should do further. That sort of a thing also was something which we found extremely helpful. So now we have a situation up to now that we have in our hospital. What we did was that we set up a camp where the first we started off by training the staff. The second thing which we did was set up a camp where we screened the patients, and then now we have also Shaukat Khan is a cancer hospital, and radiation is an integral part. So Tabinda, in your what you call department as such, we now have these screened patients who are coming in. What steps should we take in the department as such so as to minimize the exposure of the patients? Because one of the main recommendations was that there shouldn't be a situation where a lot of patients or waiting areas, they should not be overcrowded as such. So what did we do over there?
Yep. So thank you, Dr. Arif. The main challenges that we had in radiotherapy department was that we had almost 200 to 250 patients on treatment. And it is very crucial that these patients continue their treatment uninterrupted. And at the same time, they should be safe from this pandemic, the COVID-19. So there were different measures that were taken during this at the departmental level. First of all, the patients were asked that who are mobile and they can walk on their own and they can manage on their own, they should not bring their attendants. They should only be allowed, only patients should be allowed in the hospital.
So yeah, what I would like to say is that only the patient, if you're going to cut down on the number, because if you go to any hospital, one of the most crowded areas is always the waiting areas. and you have one patient and you've got about 6 attendants and 18 relatives and 14 what you call friends who come along with them. So all those unnecessary people who accompany the only add to crowding. Stopping those from coming into the waiting areas was one of the main things which we did so as to cut down on the crowding which can happen in the department. Now, most of our departments, we have a load of 250 patients who would come anyway. And then is also a situation that we run a parallel about 3 or 4 clinics at any given time. So what happened to the clinics?
Yep, I think I'll just add to the previous question. The other thing that we did was that initially we had the appointments for 15 minutes slot for these patients, and the patients were usually asked to come a bit earlier than their appointment. But later on, a strict criteria was applied and a strict check and balance was applied. The patients were asked to come right on their appointment, and their appointments were spaced out as well, so that at any given time we have no more than 2 patients waiting for radiotherapy for their turn. So leaving the question for the clinics and OPDs that are running parallel to radiation department, I think I will ask Dr. Sumaira that what further steps were done to continue the care of these patients in OPD and at the same time continue radiotherapy for these patients as well.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Kavinda. So, like any other department, we have a workflow which includes outpatients, we have CT simulations, we have radiation, patients who are on treatment. So, COVID also affected us in all these aspects. As far as clinics were concerned, so we had clinics going on for the new patients, for the follow-ups. So because of the COVID situation, we had logistic issues, there were transport problems, and at the same time, there was chances of increasing the transmission of this virus by making the patients coming close to each other, especially in an outpatient setting. So a system was set up by the hospital administration in which we were able to see our patients in the teleclinics. So this was a way of communicating with our patients and booking them for their treatments at the right time, and at the same time asking for their follow-ups and how they're doing in their treatment.
So Sumaira, over here now, if we go in a sequence as such, the aim was so as to minimize the crowding in the
outpatients
and at the same time protecting our staff as well. Because at the end of the day, if your staff gets ill, then there will be no one to see them. So the first thing which you need to do is to minimize the crowding and the possibility of the staff as well as the patients infecting and spreading the disease to others. And over here, we stopped the attendants from coming with the patients. That would cut down the number. Secondly, not allowing patients also to gather together at any given time and making their appointments such so that the spacing is such that the number of patients who are in the department at any given time that is reduced. And thirdly, for our consultations, we switched to what you call telemedicine, where telephone calls were made to the patients and follow-up was done through either WhatsApp or through a telephone call as such. And for patients who who needed scans, they were asked to get them done. For patients who were well, where no further action needed to be treated, they were ensured and reassured that their appointment for a physical checkup would be sent after the pandemic itself is over. And for patients who actually needed an input, they were asked to either come to the emergency or some arrangement was made within the department so that those patients who did need urgent care were also seen.
Yes, and at the same time, we had patients who were actively on treatment as well. So the patients were getting treatment. So
here we come to that portion which was actually my question, and I diverted it very quickly.
I'm going to answer that question, don't worry.
Answering that question. Radiation itself is a department where you've got 2 sets of patients. One who are on treatment and the other one who are waiting for treatment. So those who are on treatment, you don't have a choice. Those patients, once they start the treatment, need to finish the treatment.
So that's why, what we did is, so the patients who were on treatment, there were different types of cancers. There are certain cancers which are category A. So category A cancers are those cancers in which treatment cannot be delayed. cannot be delayed, and any delay can lead to actually affect on the overall survival and their overall long-term control as well. So because of these reasons, while we were dealing with all the COVID scenario, we made sure that these patients are continuing their treatment.
So
And-
for, sorry to interrupt again over here, that patients who are undergoing radiotherapy, as you correctly pointed out, can be category A, B, or C. I think to simplify for everyone who is listening, category A is a patient where if there is an interruption, that will have impact in terms of survival. And head and neck and cervix are two cancers where it has been consistently shown that if you have a break in the treatment and that break is over a week, it will lead to about a 10% reduction in cure rates. So those are your category A patients, head and neck and cervix. And these patients will take priority over everybody else in terms of whatever arrangements are
So,
made.
yep.
Yeah, yes.
So the other dilemma that we had is because most of our patients are from outstation, and the hotels and everything was locked. The city was under lockdown, so they had no place to stay. So this was another concern that we had to fight at the clinical front and at this deal with these issues as well. So for the patients who were on treatment, we had to cut down their fractions and hypofractionate them so that they can complete their desired treatment in as quickly as possible without actually compromising their outcome.
So the idea of basically hypofractionation is again so as to minimize the number of their hospital visits. Every time the patient comes to the hospital, he is at a risk of acquiring the infection. Not only acquiring the infection, cancer patients have been shown to be high risk. What is the risk of patients? Which are the high risk groups? If you get corona, who is most likely to die? Apart from an old radiation oncologist, who is at maximum risk. I've been in isolation now for 2 months,
That's
sitting in my room.
Yeah, that's good. So, amongst the patients, if you talk about the patients, so the high-risk patients are those who have other comorbidities, including cancer patients.
So one would be the elderly patient.
Elderly patients, as you
Now,
mentioned,
60 is not elderly, yes, I understand.
yeah. So unfortunately in Pakistan, so I was looking at the data this morning, so from 50 to 60, the case fatality rate is 5%, and from 60 to
Can you make a
70
recommendation to the hospital that all those consultants who are over the age of 60 should be given time off till this pandemic is over so as to protect them?
Who will do the hypofractionation?
No, I can't define this at this point.
Right. So patients, what is the mortality for a patient who is over the age of 80? So if someone who is over the age of 80 gets corona, what is his chances of dying?
It's 1/4, around 25%.
So it is pretty high.
Yeah.
And then the next risk group would be the patients who are what you call cancer
Cancer
patients.
patients.
And what is the risk over here?
So actually, I don't have the data right now, but as long as our hospital is concerned, so we have one cancer patient who had.
Fortunately, I had the opportunity of looking at some of the papers Tabitha sent last time.
Yeah.
The risk for a cancer patient of dying from corona is about 7%.
Yeah.
And especially those patients who are undergoing immunosuppressive therapy. So most of the radiation these days is also concurrent. These patients are not only having radiotherapy, but also having chemotherapy at the same time. Plus, if you are having large areas of your body treated, then it also, what you call, can cause immunosuppression. So cancer patients are high risk patients. And these patients need to, one of the ways of protecting them is to minimize the number of visits to the hospital. And you do that by hypofractionating. Hypofractionating in simple words means that a treatment which is a 7-week treatment where you try to reduce the time and try to do it in a shorter period by giving smaller number of fractions. Smaller number of fractions when you give, you are not trying what you call, you're not compromising the cure, but what you are doing is you're trying to treat the patient in a shorter period of time. So in cervix, what did you do, Tabitha?
So as Dr. Sumaira said previously, cervix is one of the category A cancers, and it's basically a disease where radiation is the mainstay of treatment, and they have a cure rate of more than 70% if they are treated on time with radiation. And this is that disease where a delayed radiotherapy has a significant impact on their survival. So for those patients where radiotherapy, they were on actually radiotherapy already, we tried to hypofractionate them so that we can keep the total dose equivalent to the one we planned, and we continued the same. And even ASTRO and American Society of Brachytherapy recommended that this is one cancer where brachytherapy and radiotherapy should not be compromised under any circumstances. But for new patients, because we normally get patients with stage 3 and 4 and bulky disease with huge nodes. So those were the patients who were symptomatic as well, and we were avoiding to start them on treatment and minimize their travel to the hospital. So we started them on induction chemotherapy. We routinely give them 2 cycles of carboplatin paclitaxels, which reduce their visit to 2 visits in 6 weeks. And actually, it helped us in reducing their tumor burden and also delaying their radiotherapy for about 6 weeks.
So Davinda is too fast. I need to keep with her so as to keep and synthesize what she's saying. So, Sumaira, why is it that people are so worried when it comes to hypofractionation? That as a radiation oncologist, the conventional treatment is giving 2 gray per fraction or something around like that sort of a range. Once you start increasing the fraction size, what is the worry? Why are people so afraid of giving a higher fraction size?
So initially, because we deal with different types of tumors, there are tumors which are treated hypofractionately anyways. So
if you go to US and ask any radiation oncologist that why don't you treat this patient in 3 weeks rather than 7 weeks, what is the first thing he will tell you?
So as far as radiobiology is concerned, the hypofractionation can result in increased skin reaction or increased late-term toxicity. However, let me complete first.
That's fine.
So the answer is that as we are discovering as the time is going by, we are finding out that actually hypofractionation is beneficial in most of the tumors, like in breast cancer, in prostate cancer. So hypofractionation is the way to go. Even I think in breast we are talking about extreme hypofractionation, and long-term data is showing that the long-term effects are not very bad. In prostate we are regularly doing hypofractionation, and the survival benefit is equal to 37 fraction, which used to be 7.5 weeks.
I think we are skeptical to start with hypofractionation,
but
gradually we are moving there.
Got very confident with the hypofractionation.
So in simple words, when you hypofractionate, the main criticism for hypofractionation is that it increases the late effects. Your acute effects are not what you call any different. If anything, they may be less. But it is the late effects which has been the main concern over decades. But in the last 20 years, more and more research has gone into hypofractionation. And as Sumaira has pointed out, that in breast cancer, in prostate cancer, these are 2 sites where you have now long-term follow-up of patients treated with hypofractionation, and where the morbidity, the toxicity has been what you call no different from longer courses.
Yes. Yeah.
So that sort of evidence over here helps us most. For developing countries, our resources are always limited. Pandemic, we are always in a pandemic. Corona will go, but still the resources over here will still stay the same. So this is an opportunity for us also and for the world to look at these things in a different way altogether. Davinda, right now in our department, out of 270 patients, how many patients are undergoing breast radiotherapy?
The workload is 50-50, so we treat 50% of the breast at any given time.
So 125 or 130 patients would be breast radiotherapy.
Yeah.
So in this day and age, if you have a patient who is undergoing 6-week course of radiotherapy for the breast, it shouldn't be done. I think at least in Pakistan, nobody should be given more than what you call 3 weeks of treatment. You will have an exceptional situation where you will want to give a longer fractionation, but for the run of the mill, in and out breast patient, hypofractionation should be the treatment.
I think in COVID time, other than hypofractionation, we were dealing with a problem which was, we had time limitation. So patient had to finish their treatment earlier on. So with hypofractionation, actually we did some BID fractionation as well. So patients who were left with 5 fractions, 4 fractions, they were given those 4 fractions in less time period so that they could go home and so that we could reduce the patient burden in the hospital. And at the same time, we had some new patients who were waiting for breast radiotherapy. So in that case, I think Estro has given a very good guidance in breast cancer patients in which they have categorized the breast radiotherapy, and they have actually said the patients who are 65 or older, we can actually, and they are hormonal positive, we can actually skip radiotherapy in these patients. Then the younger age group, we need to think about node positive and node negative patient. Node negative patients can have 5-day regimen
Right,
as well.
that's fine, Asha. We're going to the specifics now. One of the ways of cutting down what you call patients who are on treatment and reducing it is to hypofractionate. Say, for example, I'll give you an example for my head and neck patient who was planned for 60 gray 30 fraction as post-operative dose. We changed all those patients to 15-20, at least the equivalent portion. We calculated what he had received, and then for the remaining fractions, we tried to what you call give a dose which was equivalent, but the fraction size was increased to 250 centigrade per fraction. So 2.5 gray from 2 gray we moved on to, and that's how we cut down on the time. Then, so breast workload you can reduce by hypofractionating. Head and neck workload you can reduce by hypofractionating. Apart from that, there are other patients as well. For example, you've got patients who are undergoing neoadjuvant, what you call chemoradiation before rectal cancer. Whether you see a lot of these patients, did you make any changes in their plan? Or?
So yeah, in routine times when we are not dealing with pandemic, we routinely treat rectal cancer with a longer course of radiotherapy, giving them 28 fractions over 5.5 weeks. But there in rectum, there is a significant data is available. Actually, phase 3 trials are available of equivalence of short course radiotherapy, but it was never adapted. But during the times of pandemic, actually the world has moved to short course of radiotherapy, which is 25 gray in 5 fraction. So in a week's time, the rectal cancer patient will finish their treatment and then they can go on to have their surgery, and which is actually equivalent to the longer course of treatment.
Right. And for prostate patients?
So I was not worried about my prostate patients. So luckily, or I think fortunately or unfortunately, in prostate cancer gaps or the treatment delays they do not affect the survival that much. We can delay the treatment by putting them on hormonal androgen deprivation therapy. And once they're on androgen deprivation therapy, we can actually slightly delay their radiotherapy. But now, as we know, the COVID situation is not going to be clear in next 1 year or 2 years, or next couple of years. So we need to treat.
We are more optimistic than you.
Yes. But I think now the time is coming when I have started treating these patients. But again, with the same thing that we have adopted for other cancers, hypofractionation, looking at the thing that we can avoiding radiotherapy in patients who can go on active surveillance, maybe thinking about other ways in which we can make it more effective.
So if I summarize all this, what we did in terms of patients who are on treatment, first of all, get a list of all the patients who are on treatment. Identify your category A patients, which is head and neck and cervix. In those patients, hypofractionate, increase the fraction size and reduce the treatment size. That would be your top priority. Then for your next group of patients, which is what you call breast and prostate and all those tumors where you have more leverage, again try to hypofractionate, but also keep in mind that these patients are going to live on for a long period of time. 15-20 years survival is not unusual now for patients with early disease and for breast cancer patients. So don't hypofractionate to an extent where if you end up with a survivor and you have given a dose which would produce serious side effects, that needs to be avoided. Your hypofractionation should be within a reasonable safety margin. And I think probably it is safe to go up to fraction sizes of 2.75, but beyond 2.75, except for, I can understand prostate 60-30, that's an unusual situation, but generally 2.5 to 2.75 would be a range which would be relatively safe when it comes to hypofractionating. How many patients out of those 270 were palliative patients?
So roughly at any given time, it's just over the top of my head, I think we have 10 to 15 patients which are palliative, because mostly in our department, we have already adopted single fraction radiotherapy for palliative patients. So they are discharged the same day. We give them 8 gray single fraction on the same day and they are discharged.
And I think over here, again, there's a message for everybody in developing world that you do your palliative treatment in the shortest possible time. Most of the bone metastases you should treat with single fraction, unless there is a good reason for it. There is hardly any reason why any palliative treatment should go beyond 1 week. And in a pandemic situation, almost 95% of your palliative treatment should be a single fraction.
Yeah.
Even for brain, you can do in 2 fractions, like 600 times.
And we should not forget that these are the patients who are the most frail and at risk of getting this COVID infection. So Dr. On, can I just ask you a quick question? Because we know that the transmission is from patient to patient, but we have a static equipment in the department, and that same equipment is used by all the patients. There are different accessories that we use during radiotherapy, and they are used by many different patients. So what measures and guidelines IDE has taken in this regard to ensure that we can minimize the cross-infection between these patients?
So we recommended, we suggested, based on international guidelines, that between patients, the area of the couch or the table, it should be cleaned with alcohol-based wipes, at least 70% of alcohol. And it should be, if it is visibly contaminated, it should be cleaned properly, thoroughly, and then it should be disinfected with alcohol-based wipes. And also the patient-specific equipment, like you use face masks, and so they are actually for patient specific, and we advise for them as well that it should be separated from different patients have different use different masks, so it should be separated.
Or in a real world, because radiotherapy again a unique challenge. The challenge is that we have a equipment which 270 patients are going to share, and there is the staff which is going to go into the room.
Yeah.
So if that room becomes contaminated by a COVID patient, given the kind of what you call facilities we have, what are the chances of disinfecting it so that everybody can be 100% certain, or at least certain to an extent that this room is now totally safe?
So it's I was talking about the routine patients. So if a room is exposed to a patient who is confirmed COVID positive, or if some of our patient is COVID positive and he needs urgent emergency radiotherapy, so then ideally it should be, if it's a known patient, it should be done at the end of the list. So that is one recommendation, one thing. If we do not know and somebody had radiotherapy and you come to know, oh, this patient was COVID positive.
And we had that scenario last week.
So then that area should be closed and locked down. No further radiotherapy should be performed in that area until it requires terminal cleaning. Terminal cleaning means it requires cleaning of all the equipment in that area, all the tables, countertops, computers, etc., etc. Everything needs to be cleaned thoroughly and properly.
The reason I'm asking this question is that sooner or later we will have a situation where we will have a COVID positive patient, and should we bring that COVID positive patient down to the department, at least in our what you call country, and treat him on radiotherapy, or should we what you call, are our systems of disinfecting to that quality, or is it best not to put others at risk and stop that particular patient's treatment?
So as far as the quality of the disinfectants are concerned, so this virus is can easily be killed by alcohol-based.
We know all those things about killing it. I also wash my hands.
I'm talking about on the surface area, the chlorine-based solutions. The killing of this virus does not require any specific like high-fi disinfectants or things like that. It depends on the person who is actually doing that, and if you trust, I'm sure that they can clean the room, and you are doing that. So I think that is not a problem.
And if I can just add to this, that bringing them down to radiation actually depends on the efficacy of radiotherapy and the indications for radiotherapy in this point. For example, if it's a very palliative radiotherapy.
If I ask you, Tarinda, that there is a patient on the ward, he is COVID positive, and we need to give him some radiotherapy, what would you tell me that we should treat him or we shouldn't
No, so
treat him? Yes or no?
yeah, it cannot be a black and white answer.
Maybe
It has to be rationalized.
Because at the end of the
For-
day, the decision has to be made.
Yeah, so for example.
I'll tell you what I would do.
Yeah. So if it's a 30 years old female with cervical cancer and she is bleeding and she's going to die from that bleed,
Mhm.
but dying from she has a very little chance of dying from COVID because
Mhm.
of her young age and no
Yeah.
co-morbs,
Mhm.
then we will bring her down for treatment, keep treating her as a last patient and following closely
Yeah.
with ID, taking all the precautions that are possible, because it's not that we have to save other patients.
Mhm.
Yes, that is important, but we have to save her as well. But on the other hand, if it's an elderly metastatic disease patient with cord compression or brain mets, I think in that situation we will discuss with the family and
I would
we
like
will not
to,
bring him.
I
Yeah.
would like to add one thing. So probably in near future, or maybe in coming few months or even
When
years,
the vaccine comes.
when the vaccine comes,
Mhm.
if it comes. So before that, we'll probably have to live with this, maybe
Yes.
for months or years.
Yeah.
So we cannot say that if somebody has COVID and we should delay the treatment for how long?
Yes, no, we
There is,
can't.
I don't see, any hope of vaccine in near future or,
Everybody is a pessimist over here. Sumera already feels it will stay for 2 years and you have no hope for vaccine. So what is?
In near
hope for
future.
Well, I'm saying we'll
in
live
near
with it.
future.
Yeah.
In near
We'll all
future.
live with it.
I think we'll all live with it.
So it's just
I
like,
think
just
this
like
is-
influenza virus. So when
Yes.
it started, in the pandemic situation, it caused millions of people, millions of people died in 1918 when it came. But then now we are dealing with influenza.
Yes.
So a sensible approach would be that if you have a COVID positive patient, if it is an emergency is emergency, then you have to treat. There is no ifs and buts about it. You treat it as an emergency. But if it is not an emergency, then that patient should wait till he becomes negative.
COVID negative, yeah.
So once he becomes COVID negative, then he can have treatment. But if it is an emergency situation, then certain things which Tavinda pointed out are extremely important. That this patient obviously will be treated as an emergency, but make sure that the timing and the way you do that patient is followed. He should be the last patient who is treated on the day. And after that, the procedures should be followed so as to disinfect the equipment and everything. So that next morning, when we start with the other 270 patients who come, they have minimum chance of being exposed to the contamination.
Or like in our department, and we are expecting that the COVID is going to spread and we are going to have increased numbers. So maybe we can dedicate a unit for
Yeah,
COVID
just same
patients
for
only.
Everybody.
Yeah.
Yes.
We can dedicate a unit. We have 5 linear excavators, so maybe one of the machines can be dedicated for COVID patients, positive patients only, and while the rest can manage the workload for the other patients.
And that's
But I'll just try. I
think
want to
again,
change that.
Over here, I would say this is a luxury which a developing country like us cannot afford. I think we might be able to have 5 linear accelerators. But for atomic energy centers where they're waiting this are already in months, for them to dedicate one may not be something which, and even for us, that in Pakistan every year there are about 200,000 new cases which are diagnosed. So which means that you have a number of cases per month is about 16 to 17,000. For 2 months, the whole country didn't treat a single new case or very few. All the atomic energy centers were closed, and even we didn't take in any new patients as such. So for 2 months, you have a backlog of about 40,000 patients, and then this month, which has started, another 20,000 would be added to that. So there are 60,000 patients with cancer who are somewhere in the community and who haven't had any treatment yet. So if one makes a logical conclusion from it, that when you open up, your workload will increase tremendously. Hospitals may choose not to accept the patient or not to treat them, but that doesn't mean that those patients
Yeah,
don't
so
exist.
We actually don't know that whether we are going to open up and go back to the original, or this is the new normal and we just have to adapt to this situation. So
Right,
that is,
but irrespective of that, if you look at it at the national level, those patients are there, and if they are not treated, we all know that if you don't treat the cancer, they will all die of this disease. So COVID itself, the direct number of deaths related to COVID may be very small. Right now, we have only got 1,000.
about 1,000.
Yeah, so it's 2.1%.
You can be very, very sure that 60,000 people will die from cancer if you don't treat them.
Yeah.
So that,
So
those
that is
patients
why it
need
is
to be
important.
treated
Yeah.
somehow. And out of those 60,000, you will have to make the selection of who you're going to treat and who you're not going to treat. So which takes us to the next important challenge, which is patients who are waiting for their treatment. So as I said at the beginning, that for a radiotherapy department, you have two challenges. Patients who are on treatment, here you have done hypofractionation, and the second one is, of course, patients who are waiting for treatment. For Pakistan, again, head and neck cancer is about 20% of all cancers, and breast cancer is very common. So about 40 to 50% of the patients are actually breast cancer patients. So you're talking about a good 18 to 90,000 new breast cancer cases in Pakistan. So Sumaira, can you make any recommendations which may be useful for us when all these breast cancer patients come?
So I think we are all going to face this problem in all the other fields as well, in surgical field and also in radiotherapy. So there are certain ways in which we can only make a plan and then we can see how it turns out to be. In breast cancer patient, for example, we have plans to hypofractionate this patient to a 5-fraction regime. And I think luckily for us, we never stopped inducting patients. We were treating patients during the pandemic as well.
This 5-fraction thing is important in a sense because it will have implications in terms of what the future holds for us. The 5-fraction is a treatment where a breast cancer patient will receive daily treatment for 5 days.
Yeah.
And his whole course will be completed within 5 days. For a patient who undergoes 5 treatments, can you treat the what you call supraclav, or you just can treat the chest wall, or can you just treat the breast?
So I think right now there will be limitations and only node-negative patients will be treated with this. And as we get more comfortable, I think a time will come and we'll start treating those patients as well.
But in a situation which we are facing right now, where we have got thousands of patients who are waiting for treatment, and most of those patients will probably need to wait even longer if we stick to what the convention is. So over here, giving 5 fractions may be one way of overcoming that.
Yeah.
Maybe we may treat what you call patients extra, but I think that would be fairly justified in a situation. The choice over here is either no treatment or breast radiotherapy.
But I think right now the important thing is hypofractionation needs to be done properly as well. This is something that it can't be done like with the previous parameters that you start treating patients with hypofractionation. So you need to follow the protocols for hypofractionation and then you need to treat your patient. That is very, very important.
See, over here I will slightly differ over here because we have to see what the resources of the country are at present. You need to, and we also need to be what you call aware of the fact that the technologists and the physics staff and other ancillary services, they are not what you call trained to an extent which you will see in the West. Over here, simple treatments are much more easier to deliver and the chances of error tends to be less. So generally, because we as a hospital, Shaukat Khana itself will treat probably no more than 1,000 patients. But you're talking about 90,000 patients over here. And for those 90,000 patients, almost 80,000 will need radiotherapy. And if 80,000 need radiotherapy, your technique should be simple and quick. So more and more patients can actually benefit from radiotherapy, and probably a simple technique should be what you call implemented so as to reduce the chance of error.
I think I would agree with Dr. Sumaira that we can adopt different regimes, different hypofractionation, but it has to be done wisely. And secondly, we should keep in mind that treating 5 patients simply with a simple technique and adding with the hypofractionation, we are going to add a significant amount of late toxicity to them.
We should be more. I think we are both talking on different wavelengths over here. I'm talking about a patient not having treatment or having 25 K in 5 fraction.
But if 25 K in 5 fraction is not delivered properly, you are leading. Basically, you will end up in a cosmetic result which is not acceptable for a 30-year-old.
I think I would like to go from here to a different topic.
Individual cases can always be difficult, but for general purpose, because as an oncologist, or if you're going to make a case, when you are in a war situation and you have a wound on the leg, the treatment is which is likely to get infected, what will you do?
Chop it off.
Chop it off, do an amputation.
Yes.
This is a situation which we do not see because we are in a closed environment as such.
No, we all agree. That's what we are doing as
Yeah.
well.
So you
But
are.
I think it is important because if people are
Okay.
listening to this conversation, a word of caution is very, very important. Whatever we are doing, you need to do it with evidence.
And you need to
So-
know what you are doing.
So, and
actually.
you need to know what you are doing. If you are comfortable with hypofractionation, you have checked your plans, please go with that. That is the most, I think, the intelligent thing to do right now in this COVID era. But it needs to be done intelligently. And it is very important that we know in radiation, I think all these things are very important that you need to know what you're doing when you're talking about adjustments and when you're talking about corrections. These things are very
So
important.
for patients who are likely to, as we predict, is about 80,000 patients a year which come. That workload which is going to increase for everybody once things open up. And at that time, probably whatever you feel safe with.
Yeah.
But keep in mind that hypofractionation would be the way forward over here as well. Depending upon the resources you have and the technology you have available to you, see what you can achieve. Whether you want to do 25 in 5 or 14 or 40 grades, 15 fractions, but at least don't do 5 or 6 weeks of treatment because 3 weeks certainly is good enough.
I think we should change the topic now. So these patients have received radiotherapy, but then a clinical oncologist would like to follow these patients
Before
as well.
that, the other main group is head and neck. Head and neck patients and half of your patients are, more than half, 70% are oral cancer. So I can tell you for oral cancer, if you have stage 44 tumor, you can treat that patient with palliative radiotherapy, don't waste your resources, giving concurrent chemoradiation 7-week course. These patients do badly, the survival is extremely poor, and for those patients, simple short course of palliative radiotherapy within a week is as good as a 7-week course.
Yeah.
People may not agree with it, but at least for a developing country like Pakistan or for India or say Bangladesh, where the head neck cancer and oral cancer is the main problem, our results, as well as in the West as well, these patients do badly, treat your T4 with palliative intake. So that will sort out your head and neck cancer.
So I just want to discuss briefly about telemedicine clinics because this was a new and a unique experience for all of us that we developed during this pandemic. We have never practiced it. So Dr. Sumaira, can you just highlight how was your experience and how do you think this could be incorporated in our routine practice in the future?
So I think it was a wonderful experience. Initially, we all had concerns that it might not be a good idea, but then once we started doing it, actually we were able to extract all the information from our hospital information system. We were able to look at their scans, and at the same time we were able to see our patients and we were able to ask about any toxicities or any problems. And it was a wonderful way to communicate with our patient, yet to avoid infection and to avoid transmission of virus and viral infection, and to ask them to come from faraway places to Lahore for just a follow-up. This was actually environmental friendly as well. So patients were not spending money on their transport, patients were not scared of getting the infection from the hospital, and patients were getting their follow-ups, they were talking to their doctors and they were getting the instructions, and at the same time we were booking them for their investigations and we were booking them for the chemotherapies, we were booking them for their next appointments, and at the same time when we were concerned about anything that we were not sure about or we wanted our patients to have a closer look, they were advised to come to the hospital.
And I agree, totally agree with this. And I think this is one thing that we have learned from this pandemic, and we are going to adopt it in future as well. So for routine follow-up patients who are our annual follow-up or 6 monthly follow-ups, in the future as well, once this pandemic is over, hopefully, we will continue doing our telemedicine clinics in future as well.
Yeah, the long-term follow-up clinics can easily be switched to telemedicine. It's safe because patients have to travel a long way, and if you're only going to check a result and tell him to come back in 12 months' time, you might as well do that on the what you call telephone.
So another topic that we haven't touched is the staffing issues that we had in this pandemic. We have a limited number of trained radiotherapy technologists or physicists, and because of the lockdown situation, because of their inability to reach hospital during this situation, and a fear that they will have contact with the patient and they'll have to be sent in isolation for 2 weeks. So this was another thing that has to be discussed, and we had to divide these technicians into shift systems so that we can save a cohort of technicians, our trained staff, in case of an emergency, that once somebody is infected or goes into an isolation, then we have sufficient people to replace them and continue our services at the same time. So this was actually planned on the hospital level, and it was done all across for all the clinicians, the junior doctors, radiotherapy technologists, and physicists. So Dr. Wan, would you like to add something in relation to the screening process? So in future, if we are seeing that this is going to continue, are we going to change our screening parameters in getting COVID test for all these patients before starting treatment, or do you think this screening is sensitive and specific? The questionnaire actually is alone is enough in this situation.
So, so far I haven't read any recommendations from any society that before radiotherapy they should be tested for COVID. So there are guidelines for surgeries for chemotherapy patients, hematological malignancies particularly. So before giving chemo, because that has an impact on the patient health and so further. But at this point, there are no recommendations for testing. So we will continue the screening process, because we can only, at the end of the day, we can only reduce the risk of an infected person to enter the hospital or to come for radiotherapy, but we cannot eliminate this risk as such, because we cannot test 200 patients for they are coming daily for radiotherapy. If they are coming for, let's say, 1 week time or 2 weeks. So what should be the time limit for testing? So we cannot do that. So screening is one thing, but if they have symptoms, obviously, so we will not offer radiotherapy. They should be isolated and tested at that point. But at this point, I would suggest that we should go for testing for everybody.
So what about brachytherapy? It's one of the most important components in cervical cancer and gynecological malignancy. So is it a high-risk procedure, and does it need special precautions or special measures to be taken before performing a routine brachytherapy procedure?
So I think for brachytherapy, obviously, apart from the patient screening and taking all the measures, the special PPE should be worn by the technician or whoever the person is in that room, and there should be gloves and gowns and obviously goggles and mask for that before that procedure. Because this is a high-risk procedure, so that's why, but not for every procedure.
The whole world has produced guidelines.
Yeah.
There are guidelines from US, there are guidelines from societies, there are guidelines from Europe, there's Singapore, China, you name it. Which one should we follow?
Dr. Arif, nasal endoscopy is a high-risk procedure.
There's a guideline.
No, my question is not regarding that.
Yes, I agree. So initially there was no information at all.
And now there is too much information.
And now there is a flood of information. So it's very hard. So we are just following, so from ID point of view, so we are following CDC, WHO, and Infectious Disease Society of America, because, and then at the end of the day, you have to look at your own resources, your own patient population, and your own, what do we want to do with our patients? As you mentioned, that people will die of cancer. So we'll have to come up with a plan and a point where we are balanced between the risk and benefit of the cancer patients and acquiring care for.
I think the guidelines, at least in my opinion, would be those which are applicable. So for if Pakistan is to follow our guidelines, then it should also look what India is doing. What would you call our neighboring countries with same sort of what you call socio-economic setup and same sort of problems what they are doing? Because we neither have the resources, nor the manpower to what you call implement the kind of recommendations they make. Recommendation may be there on paper, but to enforce it would be impossible. So guidelines should be sensible in a way that it should be realistic and achievable.
So that's why we are not blindly following WHO or CDC or IDSA. So we are, that's what I said, that we probably will have to see. And we are a specialized cancer center.
Coming to Tavinda's question now, what am I going to do?
Yeah, so no, my question, sorry.
Actually, I looked at what you call the paper you sent me yesterday, and there was a questionnaire to all this, what you call radiation oncologists, that how many of them would be prepared to do this aerosol procedures, and 60% of said they won't. 40% said they would. So there's a 60-40 split. So till that 60-40 split goes the other way, I will also be with the 60%.
Yeah, so my question was, how is the staging process affected if we do not perform a nasal endoscopy?
Right, for laryngeal cancer, it is a must. You cannot stage a laryngeal cancer unless you have done it. If you have a overt T4 tumor which has gone into the cartilage, or that's straightforward. But the difference comes when it comes to differentiating between T2 and T3. Here it has implications both in terms of the choice of treatment and also the outlook for the patient. And once you've done the treatment, there's no way you can bring that treatment back. So, I mean, your guess is as good as mine. We'll hope that we make less mistakes and
we make the best possible judgment with the available staging workup that we have. So I think we are almost, we have reached the end of the session. So Sumaira, would you like to conclude and give us 2 highlights that you have learned in this and practice changing parameters that you have adopted in this pandemic?
I think the most important thing for us was to live in this COVID-19 situation and deal with all our cancer patients at the same time. And we have all learned how to cope with it, and we are dealing how to manage our cancer patient with all the ways which is best for the patient, which includes hypofractionation, which includes telemedicine clinics, which include maybe changing their treatment for their betterment, maybe adding some other sort of treatment which might be beneficial for them. Yeah. And it has all led to, I think, we are all learning while we are going through it. We are all following guidelines. I think there's a lot of guidance, but at the same time, I think we are all learning how to coexist with this virus. And we are all trying to do our best to deal with this and to treat our cancer patient at the same time.
Yeah. So at the end, I would like to conclude this session. Thank you very much for all of your opinion and giving this enlightened talks. So none of us has ever encountered this magnitude of contagion in our professional lives, and maybe in next 100 years we'll never have one. So this is something that we were never prepared for, and we had no plans. So that is where the planners and the government and authorities need to look at that. The healthcare system needs to be built so that in future, if we have something coming up like this, we are better prepared to deal with it. And we, the oncology community, shall continue to treat our patients to the best of our capabilities under any circumstances. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.